In this video, I'm going to show you how to write the overviews for the trend graphs. So here's a practice question, which is a line graph. So you've seen this question before when we wrote our introduction. So now that we've already written the introduction for this question, we're now going to write the overview. If you want to refresh your memory, you can pause the video and read the question prompt right here. Now, the first thing that you need to do whenever you're writing the overview is that you have to look at the starting data points and the ending data points. And you have to look at the highest and the lowest data points at the start of the graph and the highest and the lowest data points at the end of the graph. So our line graph starts at the year 1980 and it ends in the year 2030. So these 2 points are our beginning and our ending data points. Now, let's take a look at what are the highest and the lowest data points. So here we can see that for the year 1980, this is our lowest data point. This lowest data point belongs to these 3 energy sources. On the other hand, this is the highest data point for the start of the graph. And this data point belongs to petrol and oil. Now let's take a look at the highest and the lowest data points for the end of the graph. So here we can see that this point right here is the lowest data point for the year 2030. It belongs to hydropower. On the other hand, this data point is the highest data point for the year 2030, and it belongs to petrol and oil. So in our overview, these are all the points that we're going to be talking about and highlighting. I want to remind you that in the overview, we do not mention any numeric details. This means that you should never mention the numbers 5 quadrillion units or 35 quadrillion units in your overview. These numeric details should only be discussed in paragraph number 3 and number 4. In the overview, we're just giving some basic information. So now, let's go ahead and write our overview paragraph. We're going to start our overview by talking about the year 1980, and we're going to first talk about the highest and the lowest data points for the year 1980. So here's our first sentence. It reads, "Generally, in 1980, petrol and oil were the dominant energy sources, while nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower were the least utilized fuels." So in this sentence, we're saying that in the year 1980, petrol and oil were the most dominant energy sources, while these 3 energy sources were the least utilized. So now that we've talked about the highest and the lowest data points for the year 1980, we're now going to be talking about the highest and the lowest data points for the year 2030. So here's our next sentence. Additionally, in 2030, gasoline and oil are forecasted to remain the leading sources of energy, whereas hydropower is predicted to take the bottommost position. So in this sentence, we're saying that in the year 2030, gasoline and oil are predicted to remain the leading sources of energy. Note that instead of using the word petrol, we've used a synonym for petrol, which is gasoline. So we're saying that petrol and oil are forecasted to remain the leading sources of energy, whereas hydropower is predicted to take the bottommost position by the year 2030. So that's all you have to do for the overview. Our overview is now complete. It only needs to be 2 or 3 sentences long. So we've covered all the main features of our graph. We've talked about the highest and the lowest data points at the start of our graph and the highest and the lowest data points at the end of our graph. And that's all you have to do for the overview. Now, let's take a look at our next example. This time, we have a bar graph. You've seen this example before when we wrote the introduction for this bar graph. If you'd like, you can pause the video and read the question prompt here. But since we've already discussed it, I'll just move on to the overview. So similar to our previous example in which we had the line graph, in this bar graph, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at the highest and the lowest data points at the start and at the end of our graph. So here we have the starting and the ending data points. This bar graph starts in the year 1995 and it ends in the year 2002. Now we have to look at the highest and the lowest data points. So in the year 1995, we can see that this is our highest data point and it belongs to local fixed line calls, whereas our lowest data point belongs to the mobile calls. For the year 2002, the highest data point is right here. It belongs to the local fixed line calls, and our lowest data point is here, belonging to the mobile calls. So now that we know exactly what to include in our overview, let's go ahead and write the paragraph. We're going to start with the highest and the lowest data points in the year 1995. So here's our first sentence. It reads, "In general, it is evident that in 1995, local fixed line calls were the most prominent choice, whereas mobiles were the least popular." So this sentence is saying that in the year 1995, local fixed line calls were the most popular and mobile calls were the least popular. Now for our second sentence, we're going to move on to the year 2002. Here's our sentence. By the year 2002, although mobile calls grew in popularity, they remained the least popular choice while local fixed line calls maintained their top position. So in this sentence, we're saying that by the year 2002, mobile calls had grown in popularity, as you can see here. However, they still remained the least popular out of all the three call types, and the local fixed line calls remained the most popular. So now that we've talked about the highest and the lowest data points at the start and the end of our graph, our overview is now complete. That's all we have to do. Let's look at our next example. This time we have a tables question. Again, you've seen this tables question before when we did the introduction, so this time we're going to just write the overview for this question. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the highest and the lowest data points at the start and the end of the table. So we can see that the table starts in the year 1999 and it ends in the year 2004. So here are our data points. Switzerland has the highest data point in 1999 and Sweden has the lowest data point in 1999. On the other hand, in the year 2004, the UK has the highest data point and Sweden once again has the lowest data point. So this here is for coffee. Our next table is for bananas. So let's take a look at the highest and the lowest data points for bananas. So here we can see that the highest data point in 1999 belongs to Switzerland and the lowest data point belongs to Belgium. Moving on to 2004, the highest data point belongs to Switzerland and the lowest belongs to Denmark. So now we know exactly what to talk about in our overview. Basically, you just have to describe all of these highest and lowest data points that are circled in the red color. Now, you can describe this information in any way that you want. Whichever way is comfortable for you works fine. So for example, if you want to talk about all the data points in the year 1999 first, and talk about all the data points in the year 2004 next, you can do that. On the other hand, if you want to first describe the data points for coffee and then describe the data points for bananas next, you can do that as well. You can describe this data in any way that you see fit. It doesn't matter how you describe it. The important thing is that you describe all the data points that we've discussed. So as long as you discuss the highest and the lowest data points, you'll do a good job in the overview paragraph. Now in my example, I want to describe these data points by starting with the country Switzerland. The reason I want to start with Switzerland in my example is because I notice that Switzerland has the highest data point in 1999, and it also has the highest data points for the years 1999 and 2004. So I'm going to start there. So here's my first sentence. It reads, overall, Switzerland had the highest coffee sales in 1999 and dominated banana sales in both 1999 and 2004. So in this one sentence, I've described 3 different data points. Now I'm going to move on to my next sentence, and I'm going to talk about the next set of data points. This time, I'm going to start off with talking about Sweden, because Sweden has the lowest data points for the years 1999 and 2004 when it comes to coffee. So here's my sentence. Sweden sold the least coffee in both 1999 and 2004. Now I've decided that I'm not going to stop this sentence here. I want to continue this sentence and I want to form a complex sentence. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add the data for these 2 data points as well in the same sentence. So I can do that by using the subordinating conjunction whereas. So here's the second part of our sentence. Whereas Belgium and Denmark sold the least bananas in 1999 and 2004 respectively. So what I'm saying here in this second part of the sentence is that Belgium sold the least bananas in 1999 and Denmark sold the least bananas in 2004. Notice that whenever we use the word respectively, it means that the information that comes before in the sentence and the information that comes later in the sentence directly corresponds to each other. So if I say Belgium and Denmark sold the least bananas in 1999 and 2004, this means that the year 1999 is talking about Belgium, whereas the year 2004 is talking about Denmark. So Belgium corresponds to 1999 and Denmark corresponds to 2004. So that's how we use the word respectively. So for this question, this is all that we're going to write for the overview. You may have noticed that we have not talked about this data point in our overview. Now, if you want, you can include this data point in your overview. You actually should if you can. However, I decided to not include this data point because I did not want my overview to become too long. Remember, you only have 3 to 5 minutes to write the overview paragraph. Also, you don't have to talk about every single key information in your infographic when you're writing the overview. You only have to discuss the most important data points. Now, all these data points that are circled in the red color are important. So since I've talked about almost all of them, I decided that leaving this data point out is not going to make much of a difference. So I've decided to leave it out for 2 reasons. The first reason is that I don't want the overview to become too long because you only have 3 to 5 minutes to write the overview. And the second reason is that I've covered almost all of the important features of this table. So that's all we're going to write for our overview for this question. Now let's take a look at our final example. This time we have a pie charts question. So the first thing we do, as you may know by now, is we look at the highest and the lowest data points at the start and at the end of our infographic. So in this case, we're going to start off by looking at Yemen. So our data for Yemen starts in 2000 and it ends in the year 2050. So let's look at the highest and the lowest data points. So here we have our lowest data point for 2000 and here we have the highest data point. For the year 2050, this is our highest data point and this is the lowest data point. Let's move on to Italy now. So here's our lowest data point and here's the highest for 2000, and for 2050 this is the lowest and this is the highest. Now, once again, you're free to write this information in any way that you want. If you want to talk about the years 2000 first and then talk about the years 2050 next, you can do that. On the other hand, if you want to first talk about the data set from Yemen and then talk about the data set from Italy, you can do that as well. For this example, I'm going to talk about the year 2000 first. So first, I'm going to talk about the highest data points in the year 2000, and then I'm going to talk about the lowest data points for the year 2000, and then I'm going to move on to the year 2050. So let's begin. Here's our first sentence. Overall, in 2000, 0 to 14-year-olds and 15 to 59-year-olds composed the majority of Yemen and Italy, respectively. So what we're saying in this sentence is that in the year 2000, 0 to 14-year-olds composed the majority in Yemen, and 15 to 59-year-olds composed the majority in Italy. So you may remember from our previous discussion, whenever we have the word respectively, it means that the part that comes before in the sentence and the part that comes after in the sentence directly correspond to each other. So this means that when we're talking about 0 to 14-year-olds, we're talking about Yemen. And when we're talking about 15 to 59-year-olds, we're talking about Italy. So that's how we use the word respectively. Now let's add on some additional information to this sentence. We're now going to be talking about the lowest data points in the year 2000 for both Yemen and Italy. So we're going to extend this same sentence by using a semicolon and using a conjunction. So the second part of our sentence reads, whereas residents over 60 years of age and between 0 to 14 years of age comprised the minority in Yemen and Italy, respectively. So in this second part of our sentence, we're saying that residents over 60 years of age comprised the minority in Yemen, and residents between the ages of 0 to 14 comprised the minority in Italy. So now that we've talked about the year 2000, we're now going to talk about the year 2050. So here are the data points for the year 2050. But you know what? We actually have a bit of a problem. The problem is that we only have 3 to 5 minutes to write the overview. And talking about all of these data points is going to take too long of a time. So what we can do is, instead of talking about each individual key feature on its own, as we've done here for the year 2000, we can simply write the following. Calculations reveal that both nations will experience significant changes in their demographics by 2050. So by doing this, you've highlighted that by the year 2050, significant changes are going to take place in the demographics, and you've done this while saving yourself precious time. I would like to remind you that you don't have to talk about every single key information in the infographic. You just have to talk about the most important key features. And if you think that there are too many key features that are important, well, then just describe some of them. So that's what we've done here. We've talked about all the key features that we could talk about in the given time. So this right here is our complete overview. And that's all that we need to write. So that, my friends, is the end of this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to write the overviews for comparative graphs.